Welcome to tonight's edition of Resistance TV. It's 10 years since Wikileaks published the Iraq war log, in fact 10 years tomorrow, exposing the horrific war crimes of the US. And 10 years ago as well, they published the collateral murder video, which had such a profound impact, I think, on worldwide opinion. Now Julian Assange, of course, is languishing in Belmarsh prison, fighting potential extradition to the United States of America, where he faces a jail term of up to 175 years for bringing this inconvenient truth to the attention of the world. So what's the future for investigative journalism? I think this question in the UK has taken on particular significance in view of the government's plans to give immunity to war criminals and to authorise criminal conduct by the security services. Incredibly, that bill, there was an attempt to amend it to explicitly exclude from the criminal conduct murder, rape and torture, and that was voted down on the floor of the House of Commons. So there's never been a more important time for brave investigative journalism of the kind that Julian Assange epitomises. Before I introduce this evening's guest, what I want to do is play a clip from the collateral murder video, just to remind ourselves of the horrific war crimes that the US perpetrated in Iraq in the early 2000s, well, the mid 2000s, in fact.
Roger. Break. Crazy Horse 1-8. Request permission to engage.
So the controller tells them they need to stop this evacuation of weapons and bodies.
Come on, let us shoot.
But it looks like the pilots understand that their commander will give the go signal if there is some interaction with weapons. So they seem to have this understanding that if people pick up the wounded, that is enough reason to get permission under the rules of engagement to kill them.
Request permission to engage.
Bushmaster 7, Roger. This is Bushmaster 7, Roger, engage.
1-8, engage. Clear. Come on. Clear. Clear. We're engaged.
And you can see that they also deliberately target Saeed, the wounded man, on the ground. Despite their earlier belief that they didn't have the rules of engagement, that the rules of engagement did not permit them to kill Saeed when he was wounded. When he was rescued, suddenly that belief changed. But you can see in this particular image, he is lying on the ground and the people in the van have been separated, but they still deliberately target and kill him.
I got an azimuth limit for some reason.
This is why we called it collateral murder.
Unfortunately, Robert Sieber, who was due to join us this evening, Edward Snowden's lawyer, is unable to be with us this evening, but I'm delighted to introduce Kristen Hrafnsson, who's the editor-in-chief of Wikileaks, and Deepa Driver, who has spearheaded the Free the Truth campaign, which has been incredibly inspirational and has done so much to bring to the attention of the general public the plight of Julian Assange. But let me start by, first of all, going to Kristen and just ask Kristen if you could just give us your thoughts about two things, really. One, what happened in the court hearing of Julian's show trial, if I can put it that way, but also what was contained in the Iraq war logs that were published 10 years ago tomorrow.
Well, it's incredible. Well, let me start to thank you for having me on here. It's incredible to think back, and that it's been 10 years since we had these stressful days in London preparing the release of these extremely important documents. 391,000 field reports from the US military, basically outlining the entire war in Iraq, in the words of the US military, from January 2004 to December 2009. This was unprecedented. This was the largest leak in military history and one of the largest leaks ever. And it was of a tremendous importance. it had a shocking effect on everyone that were diving into this material, because what it pertained was the brutal truth of the war, written by the invading armies into Iraq, and therefore they could not deny the authenticity of it or the truth that it was exposed there. It's hard to sum up all the stories that were mined in this material, but if I mention a few, it was the number of deaths and the fact that more than 65% of all the deaths that were registered were civilian deaths, and the fact that the U.S. military was actually keeping a record on the deaths in Iraq, which they had denied earlier and said on record that they were not counting bodies. They were lying. That was exposed, and what came out of this was more than 15,000 previously unreported civilian deaths. And in this release, we were working with the organization Iraq Body Count, who could add that to their sort of online memorial of those who lost their lives in this period. I mean, if we're talking about more than 30 civilian deaths every day during this period of this horrible war. In total, there was a reported 110,000 deaths in that period, and that was almost certainly way below the real numbers of the casualties in that period. There were other stories that sprang out there and which caused outrage. It was the incidents, the single incidents, the hundreds or thousands of incidents that added up. Incidents such as murdering civilians who were driving towards checkpoint and were driving too fast according to the 18, 19-year-old soldier from the US who was manning the checkpoint and opening fire, killing entire families. The soldiers who were singling out children and shooting them on the street. We're talking about the all the evidence of the torture, the rape, the murders that were recorded in these documents. And what was extremely damaging to the U.S. military and was the fact that they were observing from a distance, torturing, maiming, and killing of detainees by the Iraqi government. But they were ordered specifically by the top by Pentagon not to intervene, but collect the evidence and write reports. They should not intervene. That is basically a war crime in itself. This is sort of swept away the last sort of little inch of an attempt to legitimize this invasion and this horror. Before 2010, I believe there was an attempt by many to at least say, of course, we knew all about the lies that were used to justify the invasions at that point. But people were still saying and trying to justify this by saying, well, we had to get rid of Saddam Hussein. He was torturing and killing his citizens. But what we got there out of these reports was the evidence that under the shield of the U.S. military and the invading forces and the occupying forces, the puppet government in Iraq was basically doing the same thing without intervention, without any attempt to stop it, and by the U.S. military and the British forces as well. There were so many stories, and we were watching the collateral murder video, which I took a rich part in preparing. We released that on April 5th in 2010, and actually there is a report in the Iraq war logs pertaining to that incident. It is less than half a page, and it does not reflect the truth. all the individuals that are mentioned there as killed are called enemy combatants. So that gives you the idea of how things were categorized by the US military. That is absolutely untrue, of course, as you can see in the video evidence. I'd like to mention one other incident that was reported by the US military, and it actually pertains to the same helicopter unit that we saw in the collateral murder video with the call signal Crazy Horse 18. That incident was about two individuals who were being chased on a vehicle by the Apache helicopter. They shot upon the vehicle, immobilized it, and two individuals jumped out and threw away their weapons and signaled surrender to the Apache helicopter, who was hovering over. According to the report, the crew on the Apache helicopter called their base and asked what to do in the situation, because there were no ground troops nearby. And the reply came back, we have to, let's pass this one on to the lawyers at headquarters. And after the lawyers had been consulted, the reply came back, well, according to our handbook, you cannot surrender to an aircraft, so shoot them. So these are the horrific stories that when you have seen the Apache helicopter video, the collateral murder video, you can envision the horrors and the criminality of this this in its entirety. We can maybe talk about the trial later, but I want to mention as well that this was a shocking evidence about the war, and which came relatively close in time after the start of the war, after the invasion. And I think that never before have we got this sort of in entirety the evidence of what happened in the war, in their own words, in the words of the US military. We, of course, were also breaking new ground in the way we were handling the material. It was very responsibly handled. It was heavily redacted. We were actually criticized for over-redacting the material, which is quite contrary to the claim that Wikileaks was irresponsible and put people in harm's way by this publication, which is a hollow argument. We were working in the biggest media alliance ever put together at that time, working on a single project. It included not just the publications originally that we had worked with previously this summer, the German magazine Der Spiegel, the New York Times, and the Guardian. We also worked with the Bureau of Investigative Journalism to create content for a documentary on Channel 4, television content for Al Jazeera, both Arabic and English. We worked with Swedish television, Italian newspaper, and El País and Le Monde in France. So it was the biggest media alliance put together, and it actually created the understanding that this is the way to go forward, and this is now what everybody is trying to do in with the limited resources that the mainstream media has today. Just as an opening to sum up, I mean, it was basically the entire truth of the Iraq war that was exposed, and no one has been able to try to spin that in any way. It's impossible. The truth is there. It is still there. Maybe we haven't come in terms with how to deal with it in our democratic societies. We have to accept that this was done on our watch, and even though we can claim it was not in our name personally, it was our leaders who took part in that and bear the responsibility. No one has been brought to justice for the obvious war crimes that were exposed there, and I think we still have a way to go to come to terms with how we're going to justify all these wrongdoings that happened on our watch, basically. But that is for the future. but the evidence is there. It's online. It will not go away, and we have to go back to that later.
Well, I mean, Julian is on record, isn't he, as saying that, wars, well, virtually all wars over the last 50 years at least have been started based on lies. And if wars can be started through lies, then, we can start peace by getting the truth out there. And it's so, shocking and appalling, frankly, that a truth teller like Julian is languishing now, facing in Belmarsh prison, potentially facing up to 175 years jail term, which obviously is life, of course, in the most horrendous circumstances in the US if they're successful in extraditing him. And Julian has performed an international public service, because these sorts of appalling war crimes have now been brought to the attention of the world. And this is something, of course, that the US authorities, the British authorities, the military-industrial complex are desperate to keep secret. And given, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the sort of repressive legislation that that this government is looking to pursue now, the crucial importance of people like Julian and the crucial importance of winning this case and preventing this extradition. I mean, it couldn't be starker, in my opinion. But deeper, I mean, obviously you've been very involved in the campaign and in the Free the Truth campaign, and doing incredibly important work. But it's been an uphill struggle, hasn't it, in terms of getting the mainstream media to actually, give this the attention that it deserves. I mean, this is probably the most significant case since the Pentagon Papers were, maybe even more significant than the Pentagon Papers were published by Daniel Ellsberg. And of course, we know from what the authorities are saying in the United States that if they're successful in extraditing Julian, then he's not going to get a fair trial over there, because they're saying that the US Constitution won't apply in the same way that it did to Ellsberg. What's your take on where we are and the why the media have taken the stance that they have done in failing to report on the Julian's plight, and not just failing to report it, but actually misrepresenting and distorting the truth about Julian?
Can I start, Chris, by actually saying that I got involved with this relatively recently. Like many people, while I was aware of the courage and the excellent work that Julian and Kristen and Joseph and others have done at Wikileaks, I had not realized that when Julian took asylum in the embassy, I hope you can still hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yep. The conditions that Julian was under was so horrendous. And it was when Julian, as we got to know that Julian was being dragged out of the embassy, that I really started to pay attention very closely. And it came as a real shock to me to find out that for years while he was in the embassy, he had a terribly nasty tooth infection and a serious shoulder injury, in addition to a long-term chronic lung condition since 2012. And the British government had not allowed him to have basic medical treatment. And given the way we treated war criminals and dictators, like Pinochet, for example, it was just appalling to see this. When he was dragged out of the embassy, I couldn't believe it had happened, because despite being from a former colony of Britain and recognizing the horrors that colonialism brought to other parts of the world, I had quite seriously expected some element of the rule of law to be upheld in Britain, and to find British politicians complicit in the way Ecuador's sovereignty was violated, and how the Ecuadorians were pushed into or bribed into doing what they did to Julian really bothered me. That's when I started to pay very serious attention. And when Julian was taken into Belmarsh, that really was the last straw for me. I began to get involved with the grassroots movement, and also started to attend all the hearings, including the administrative hearings. And more recently, I've been the legal observer for the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers, attending all the days of the trial at the Old Bailey. And what John Sloboda, who was one of the expert witnesses at the trials, he's the co-founder of Iraq Body Count, said was that the Iraq war logs were the single largest contribution to public knowledge about civilian casualties in Iraq. They revealed an estimated 15,000 previously unknown deaths. 10 years on, the Iraq war logs, he says, remain the only source of information regarding many thousands of violent civilian deaths in Iraq between 2004 and 2009. By making this information public, Manning and Assange were carrying out a duty on behalf of the victims and the public at large that the US government was failing to carry out. And this, we talk about Black Lives Matter, and we're in Black History Month right now. And it is atrocious to see the way in which Black lives all over the world are being destroyed by British and American war crimes. And until Julian and WikiLeaks allowed, I remember going to a session where Patrick Coburn was speaking, the journalist, and he was saying that those on the ground in Iraq, some of the experts like him, knew this was going on, these crimes were going on, but they didn't have the proof. And why didn't they have the proof? And this comes back to your question as to why the journalists are so quiet. It's because the journalists were censoring or self-censoring the information that is made available to the public about the crimes that our governments commit in our name. And this is what we need to deal with. And it is in this regard that I think it is shameful to see the absolute absence of serious mainstream critical journalism in relation to Julian's case. Yes, there has been coverage of the case. And I've seen some excellent articles from, say, John Pilger, from Charles Glass. Fidel Narvaez wrote an excellent one. Marjorie Cohn wrote something. And these are some excellent articles that have come out. But if across those 4 weeks of the trial, if you look at the kinds of people who were, what were we talking about on the BBC? They had a journalist in court every day, almost every day. Was any report of any meaning done? And this shows you how terribly skewed the court process was, for even in terms of basic open justice. On the first day, 40 civil society organizations found out that they no longer had access to the court. Those of us who were members of the public, who were queuing outside to get into the court, to the public gallery, there were 2 courts in operation, one with the trial, one which was an adjacent court. Both courts had 33 seats each in the public gallery, so 66 seats across the 2 public galleries. How many members of the public were allowed into court? 2. And on parts of the day, 5. It's only at the end of week 3 that the seats that were reserved for VIPs by the judge were even released to the public after complaints from civil society organizations that these people who were VIPs had not shown up in the first 3 weeks. I'm shocked and horrified at the journalists who were sitting in the court, many of whom not just didn't report about the case. I saw one who came in and ate a sandwich and read a newspaper and went away. There were, of course, some good journalists, and huge credit to them, both covering it online and covering it in the room. But there were others who seriously do not seem to want to understand what is going on. I saw a comment from the BBC online from one of their journalists saying that the reason they weren't covering it is because it was repetitive.
Yes.
Rape, murder, torture, the potential to poison the defendant, spying on the defendant, the governments colluding on spying on a sovereign embassy on British soil, and the British being complicit in that. The city of not the city of London, the city, not what do you call it, the Mayor of London's office approving the budget for the Metropolitan Police to spend tens of millions of pounds surveilling both the public outside and Julian, and this was allowed in the name of justice, supposedly. I mean, this is just horrendous, and this makes me ashamed to think that I even thought there would be a semblance of justice.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's shocking and shaming that this is happening on British soil. I mean, Britain likes to sort of portray itself as the upholder of human rights, and the rule of law and the scales of justice, as it were, and due process. And it seems all of those are being trampled on. But as well as the sort of absence of the fourth estate, the mainstream media, the politicians haven't exactly covered themselves in glory either, have they, Deepa? I mean, what sort of response have you had when you've sought their support for your campaign, your Free the Truth campaign? Because it seems to me it's very rare that any parliamentarian has raised this on the floor of the House. I find it hard to recall a single time when it's happened. What's been your take on that? I mean, what responses have you received from parliamentarians when you've sought their support?
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank those parliamentarians who actually did show support, and people like, and I know, many people will recognize that much of this was too little, too late. And those of us on the left are particularly guilty of this because we haven't stood behind Julian in the way we should. And if you think of the left politicians whom many of us look up to, it took a while for them to get on board and say something publicly, though they clearly understand how horrendous this case is. But we know of the turmoil in British politics in the run-up to the elections and the kinds of challenges they faced. Of course, those are no excuses. But I am proud to say that people like Richard Bergen, John McDonnell, Diane Abbott, Jeremy Corbyn, more recently, Afsana Begum came to court. I've seen Claudia Webb on one of the Don't Extradite Assange campaign with moderating an event. So people, I know you, Chris, were the first when you tried to put in that early day motion. You've supported us right from the start. And in terms of true Labour colours, that's where, from the working class movement, that's where the support came from. But I think the political discourse has been weak. And why has, I mean, how we have to recognize that, particularly, and all of my comments today, of course, are only in a personal capacity rather than on behalf of any organization. But we have to realize the serious worries we have if Keir Starmer's CPS at the time of the Swedish investigations wrote to the Swedish authorities not to interview Julian in London, said to them in explicit words, "Don't you dare get cold feet," and prevented justice from being served in the way in which they prolonged Julian's arbitrary detention. I mean, Julian, as a result of that detention, Julian has, I mean, this has been discussed in the media, so although I won't make comments about Julian's health in any detail, because, I'm saying this as an outsider and I feel bad to say it in front of people like Kristen who know Julian well. But, he's suffering from osteoporosis. He cracked a rib when he tried to tie his shoelace. When he was in the embassy, his maximum range that he could walk is about 10 meters or thereabouts within the embassy, I am told. His peripheral vision has been reduced because of the closed quarters that he's been in for years. His psychological, they talk about, his mental health condition. Well, if you stamp on somebody and kick them in the face, and then you say they have a physical disability, that's exactly the same that what Britain, Ecuador, Sweden, Australia, and America have done to Julian. They have,
which I feel so, one of the reasons I feel so frustrated, Deepa, at the absence of proper reportage from the corporate media, and indeed the lack of interest from parliamentarians. And you mentioned some notable exceptions, but there are 650 MPs, and you named less than a dozen, and that's shame, in my opinion, on the British Parliament. It's shaming on our representative democracy. But if I could maybe return to you, Kristen, because you, I believe, were able to observe the trial from start to finish. And I wonder, when you respond, if you could perhaps give your thoughts as well about the media coverage, and particularly The Guardian and The Guardian's role in this, because many of us, as it were, on the progressive left in this country, always in the past looked to The Guardian as being the champion of fearless progressive journalism. And yet not only have they distorted the truth about Julian, they are central, are they not, to the extradition proceedings that are being taken against him. And I find it amazing, as somebody, brought up to believe that, the Guardian was a bastion of great journalism. But what was your take on the hearing itself, Kristen, in terms of how it was conducted?
Well, first a note on the media. It was appalling how little was reported about the content during the hearing, which took a month, and especially the fact that the BBC was there the entire time but didn't report at all on it. It is, of course, shocking because of the implication for journalists, especially in the UK and all around the world. It's their job that is on the line. It's their interest to monitor what's going on there, and as much the UK journalists as journalists in other countries who can, if the extradition goes ahead, will never be can securely work on stories that pertain to national security, to U.S. interest. If they perceive that it is against their interest, they can pursue individuals anywhere in the world and demand extradition and throw them in jail for decades or for life. But to be honest, at least the reporting on Julian and his plight was at least not negative, which we were seeing only a year ago in the UK media. So there was a transformation from being negative to no reporting at all to a little bit of interest. But it was shocking to how obviously it was overlooked. Just if not only from the reflection of the self-interest of journalists and journalism in the UK. I mean, for example, when the judge Baracher will decide and give her decision on January 4th, she will have to basically define the Official Secrets Acts because of the dual criminality elements in the extradition process, and if the understanding of the American understanding will prevail, that will mean what? It will be criminal for a UK journalist to receive and hold on to classified material. It will be a violation then, according to UK law, of the Official Secrets Act, just to receive it. It's incredible. But in overall, it was quite a shocking experience. I did not have high hopes for the proceedings last month after we got a glimpse on how things went in the first 2 weeks in February. But it was worse than I had anticipated. It was hurried through in this very important trial in such a way that it diminished the witness statements, the important witness statements that were being presented there. They had to be read into in a summary into the court records, which is shocking. We're talking about statements from people like Noam Chomsky that were basically summarized because there was no time left. And it was such an outrage that the judge was demanding, the magistrate, Vanessa Baracher, demanding a short version of a testimony from a torture victim, Al-Masri, who's of course got justice on the base of WikiLeaks material. And at that point in the hearing, basically Julian couldn't stand anymore and said, I will shout it out from the glass cage. I will not have a torture victim censored in this court. I mean, it was just surreal to be a witness to this. And in the end, all this was hurried through because the magistrate had decided it would end on this day, even though we had lost days and days because of COVID scare that had to be postponed, the hearings, etc. So, I mean, I have to say, you know, I had before all this experience a belief in the UK justice system, that there was an ability there to deliver justice. But after this experience, I'm not sure anymore. This case is so blatantly political in nature that it should have never reached this stage. And it's incredible to witness the sort of positive demeanor that the magistrate had towards the prosecution, the lawyers working on behalf of the United States, when they were presenting their you know, outrageous twist in the laws. I'll give you one example. I mean, the extradition laws, extradition treaty, which is not that old. I mean, it's from this century, outlines and states specifically that you cannot be extradited on a basis of a political act. And now you have the defendant Julian Assange being indicted on the basis of the Espionage Act. It's as political as it can get, and this was actually put into the treaty on the demand of the United States. But when this is pointed out, it is not really denied, but they say, well, the extradition treaty has not, this clause in the treaty has not been incorporated into the Extradition Act in the law in the UK. Thereby, it's just a treaty. It doesn't matter in that respect. But on the other hand, we want him extradited on the basis of that treaty, but we will cherry pick and choose. It's outrageous. How can you present such an argument in a society that is ruled by law? And the political nature of the entire process, the fact that you have leaders of a country basically calling in such a biased manner and prejudge him, like Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, both now and in his previous role as the head of the CIA, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, and it is totally impossible to get a fair trial there. And I mean, the evidence presented in the courtroom, in the timeline, that shows that after Trump took power, and after he had actually sent an emissary in the Congressman Dana Rohrabacher to the embassy in Knightsbridge to offer in a mafia-like deal to Julian, you know, you give us your source for the DNC leak, and I'll secure a pardon from Trump. And he said that he was basically on with the approval and the knowledge of Donald Trump. When Julian says, of course, I will never expose a source, a journalist doesn't do that. That's when we saw the machine starting to roll, and the Trump administration reversing what we now know was the decision under Barack Obama to not to go ahead with the indictment against Julian because of what they called the New York Times problem, because they couldn't distinguish between what Wikileaks did and Julian and the New York Times, nor the Guardian, nor other. And if you needed any proof about the political atmosphere in the courtroom, was towards the end when at Fitzgerald, the barrister for Julian, was saying, well, they were talking about timetable, and Fitzgerald was saying, well, unless something major happens, I think we could finish this by this date. And Judge Baretzer basically asks him bluntly, when you talk about something, major things, would that include the outcome of the US election? And we were all shocked. I mean, he was basically admitting the political nature of what's going on in the courtroom. If it matters at all, the outcome of the election in the United States and the 3rd of next month, it is basically underlining the fact that this is a political persecution. Yeah. So it was shocking on so many levels. I could go on and on about the constant shocks in that courtroom in the Old Bailey.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's interesting, Kristen. I mean, you know, you've just revealed there so much more than anything we've heard in our corporate media in this country. And you know, and there's deep out the you know, the BBC correspondent saying, "Oh well, it was repetitive," implying it was kind of boring. You know, I mean, it's astonishing. I mean, truly astonishing. And as far as Donald Trump is concerned, of course, there's plenty of clips. I think was it in the 2016 election where he was very complimentary about WikiLeaks, and obviously seems to have changed tack subsequently. But Deepa, you were outside, weren't you, for a large part of the, because as you mentioned, unable to get in, and I know there's been some complaints about the way in which the police actually, you know, as it were, controlled the crowds that were outside. I mean, what was your experience of the policing of the crowd who had gathered outside the court?
Firstly, my time outside the court just reaffirmed to the very negative aspects of the court, but also the very positive aspects of solidarity. It was amazing to see so many grassroots activists there helping to get, you know, helping us by, you know, holding our space if we wanted to go to the loo while we were standing in the queue, because, you know, you only have 2 seats. And if you miss your space, you can't get in. It was, so I'd like to firstly thank them and acknowledge what they did. I know Rebecca Vincent at Reporters Without Borders, who she and I attended almost all the days between us, and she also had this sense of gratitude towards them in allowing her to understand what was going on. But it was also very depressing to see the way in which we were treated. I mentioned earlier that I was a legal observer of the Haldane Society, and I asked if I could go in. I was told, no, you know, that won't be taken into account. I wasn't even allowed to hand in the paperwork. I emailed it in, but I didn't hear back for a while, and it was all very complicated. You will be to go into this additional court where all we could see was a screen which was about 30 feet away, like a home television screen. We queued from about 6 in the morning to get in at about 10 o'clock. When you got into the court, you weren't allowed to take water or even, you know, forget about other things, even a piece of chewing gum inside. So for the whole of the day, you ended up basically, or at least half of the day in each half, you ended up without even a glass of water to drink. I'm a disabled, I have a disability, and I was told, I asked if I could use the disabled lift, and I was told that I would lose my place in the queue because the disabled lift was at the other entrance, and if I didn't climb the 6 floors of stairs to the top, I wouldn't be let in. So my disability relates to pain, so I kind of dealt with it and went up. But this is the kind of access supposedly in a system which is where the Equality Act applies. I think the other thing, as a disabled person, I also felt very sorry for Julian, because here is a man who is sitting in court in his own trial, being served the information that he needs to prepare for this trial at a time when he's under huge psychological duress on the first day of the trial. So he's not able to meet with the lawyers properly before, because he's been locked down and his lawyers have not been able to communicate with him. They're having to post things in which then don't reach him. He then, in the court, he is this clever, intelligent, hugely capable man, is reduced to being sitting down at the back of the court in the dock, far away from his lawyers who are at the front of the court, and he has to talk over the US people who are in the back rows in order to communicate with his lawyers. He has to get on his knees and speak through a small, hole in the glass to tell somebody, oh, I need to talk to my lawyers. And this is the kind of adjustment they do for somebody who it is clear from the evidence as well, which even the US admit. He is suffering from depression. He is having suicidal thoughts hundreds of times a day. He is in a lot of pain. I mean, it is just a travesty to watch this. And I felt in some ways, some amount of catharsis to participate in that pain, because I felt what I was doing was, he's suffering solitarily in Belmarsh 23 out of 24 hours a day, locked in. And what he can expect in the US, and sorry, Chris, to go on about this, but people need to know what he can expect in the US pre-trial is to be under something called special administrative measures. If you've never heard of this, these are conditions where the defendant and his lawyers are under serious restrictions, so they cannot communicate to the press. This is pre-trial, so this is somebody who's on remand.
Yeah.
When he is in that jail, they say he will be in his cell 22 hours a day. He will be allowed out of his cell for individual recreation. And this individual recreation euphemism is that he's moved to another cell just like his, which is again empty, where he will be allowed to pace around. His only contact will be through a metal slot in the door through which his meal will be passed. And this is what Britain wants to condemn a journalist and a publisher to. This is horrendous. And we should all be protesting.
Nils Melzer, the UN rapporteur on torture, has essentially accused Britain of actually torturing Julian Assange. I mean, this is just truly shocking that Britain is responsible for this. I mean, I just find it almost unbelievable, frankly, but there it is, it's happening. But in the last 15 minutes or so, before I go to Sharm to get any reaction from our viewers, if I could go back to you, Kristen, and give us your thoughts on what do you think the future is for the kind of fearless investigative journalism that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks represents if they are successful in extraditing him and sentencing him?
I would say that this is such a serious precedent that will be set here that it will kill off all serious investigative journalism efforts, especially when it comes to matters of that pertains to national security. It will basically silence everybody. No one will dare to have a critical dissection of the United States foreign policies, their wars, and their actions overseas, and that is the aim. You said at the opening, Chris, that and you cited Julian. Julian said, "Well, if we can expose wars and the truth about wars in the way we were doing with the Iraq warlocks." We should be able to get to the point of actually, and we should strive for stopping war happening by exposing the truth about wars, and we can get there. And I think that's the realization that is lies at the foundation of the persecution of Julian. The fact that the forces that we are dealing with realize, and especially with the revelations like in the Iraq warlocks, that the possibility is there to actually stop wars, and of course that is the vested interest that they have in trying to strike off, and so they've decided to use any measures possible to basically silence Julian Assange, and more than that, basically kill him. And I have to have a word about the prison conditions. Deepa is right. I mean, the prison conditions in Belmarsh are horrible, and we heard the evidence of that in the courtroom, and the most cynical part of it, that the worst treatment was in the period when they put Julian in the health ward. That meant basically a total isolation in Belmarsh. It was used as a punishment. They emptied the corridor when he went from his cell to any other point to make sure he wouldn't meet anybody and couldn't have any communication. That's where when his mental health deteriorated in the weeks in the health ward. But bear in mind that even though Belmarsh is horrible and the treatment there is horrible, what awaits him, and it's not even contested, the description of it, of the prosecution in the courtroom, the so-called special administrative measures, the SAMs, which always remind me of other sort of niceties in words like collateral damage or enhanced interrogation techniques. SAMs basically means isolation. It means torture. It is a torture to put somebody in a cell which is 15 square feet. It's the size of a parking lot, and keep the person there without a contact to other human beings for years. That's pre-trial, and pre-trial in the US in this case could mean 2 to 3 years. So it is basically death.
And let's remember as well, Kristen, that, I mean, Julian shouldn't even be incarcerated at the moment. I mean, he was put in prison, wasn't he, for I mean, the offence of skipping bail when he sought asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy for understandable reasons. That was bad enough, in my opinion, that he received a jail term for that. But that jail term has now elapsed, and yet he's been detained in this high security prison in the most inhumane conditions, on the grounds, as I understand, the judge said that he poses a flight risk. And he has been
on remand now for more than a year. And it breaks all guidelines. The guideline is you should not keep anybody on remand for more than 180 days. That's maximum. He's been there for 370 days.
Rewriting the rules or simply ignoring the rules. I mean, this is, it's a complete breach of the rule of law, of due process. And, we should all be up in arms about this because, this is the thin end of the wedge. If they get away with this, then, as you say, Kristen, we are... it's a very dark road that lies ahead, in my opinion, for all of us, and that's why it's so important that we build and continue to build. And there is a lot of support there, but we need to continue to build that support for Julian. And on that point, I mean, perhaps just in conclusion, before I bring Sean back in, if we could maybe go to you, Deepa, firstly, and then get a comment from you, Kristen, as well. Is what would your advice be to people watching this program this evening? What can they do? What more can they do to support Julian, to try and help your campaigns to ensure that justice prevails and that we secure Julian's release? What would you say, Deepa? What would you advise people to do this evening watching?
Thanks, Chris. And I just want to, if I may, with your permission, just add to one thing that we were talking about earlier, to say that there is currently a court case going on in Spain where evidence has emerged of the way in which the United States government has spied on Julian Assange and his lawyers, so breaching all legal privilege and breaching medical confidentiality. They've also put stickers on the windows of the Ecuadorian embassy in order to be able to spy on them from the building opposite, so hearing conversations in a sovereign embassy on British soil. And these are things that we really need to be concerned about. And I would urge people to follow the trial. And I know Sean very kindly has posted some links that are useful in relation to the trial. I'd urge people to follow Craig Murray, who has done an absolutely sterling job reporting from the court every day. I know Craig writes some very interesting and detailed pieces with a lot of knowledge from his own experience as a whistleblower. I think people have to firstly recognize that this case is about the criminalization of whistleblowing and the criminalization of journalism. And everything else beyond that is a distraction. Yes, it is a horrendous torture of an individual. And I feel for Stella and her children and Julian's parents for the kind of hardship they are facing. But this trial, as much as it is about Julian Assange, it is also about the crimes that our governments commit in our name, the use of classification to hide crimes, to prevent embarrassment, and then the use of the law to, in the case of Julian, and this was revealed through the Stratfor leaks, they want to move him from country to country, leave him in prison, treat him like be a prison bride and to eat cat food. And this is what they say in writing. And this, if Julian, what he revealed, and Chelsea, what she revealed, despite the torture that she faced later, were things that provided us with information. And we talked at the start of this about, peace can be achieved by revealing the truth. But we are now at 10 years after the Iraq war logs. And much as it pains me to say so, the transparency has achieved a huge transformation in some ways in terms of our understanding of war, but very little transformation in terms of the way in which we are funding wars in Yemen, in other parts of the world.
Well, these are political questions, aren't they, Deepa? And this is where, we need our political class to step up or replace them.
But we also need ordinary people to educate themselves and to organize. Sorry to speak over you, Chris, beg your pardon.
That's okay, no, fine. No, I'm just saying, our parliamentarian, our political class are not fit for purpose. And that, the point you're making about, the lack of change that the publication of the war logs has brought about, I mean, is because of the failing of our political class, and this is why, I mean, we are supposed to live in a democracy where it's in our hands to change that. And if our parliamentarians aren't stepping up to the plate, we need to replace them with people that will do that. And of course, this isn't just about one man, important though that is, as I've already said. This is about all of us. This is about all of our people. But I mean, just before I keep saying I'm going to bring Sean in a moment, but I just wanted to get a thought from you, if I can, Kristen, just in terms of whether you've got any comments about what people can do to help you and WikiLeaks and to support Julian, over and above what Deepa's just mentioned in terms of following the various links that she's put on or had put on the screen.
Yeah, Deepa is right. I mean, I encourage people to go, because they cannot trust the mainstream media in reporting on what's going on there, to all the venues that are reporting on the facts of the case, and but they can also put pressure on the mainstream media, or the corporate media. They can put pressure on, and I've seen that in comment sections, and it is a possibility to put a pressure on them and shame them into action, and it sometimes works. And I urge people to do that. And of course, they should pressure their politicians, their local MP, into take action and make it known that it has a political cost to ignore this case. And if politicians have some sense, they should start to take the pulse. I have taken the pulse in the country, in the UK, and so have my colleagues, and we know that this is. There is a lot of support for Julian in the United Kingdom. I'm very thankful for that, and if politicians would dare to ignore this case and pretend it doesn't affect them, they are very, very wrong, because people and the voters, they do care, and they have to make it known in any way possible that it will have a political cost if you ignore this.
No. Well, thanks very much indeed, Kristen and Deepa. I wonder if I can bring in Sean now to get any reaction from our viewers this evening. Any comments from our viewers this evening, Sean, that Deepa and Kristen might have a response to in the last couple of 3 minutes?
Yeah, we've had lots of comments tonight. People have been fascinated by this incredible story, and they feel really educated this evening. A lot of the comments coming through, people are listening with complete fascination about what's been going on with Julian, with the trial, his condition in Belmarsh prison, and also with the refreshing them with the memory of the Iraq war logs, which was so very, very important. I just want to give a quick shout out to some of our regulars on YouTube. We get a lot of people tuning in every week. We've got Kevin, Mark, Jack T, John H, Damsha, NJ, Damo, and others. If I've missed you out, I'm very sorry. We've got Faraz and Leslie and Lizzie all over on Facebook. So I want to thank them all for tuning in this evening. If you've just joined us for the first time tonight, please subscribe, and you'll be able to get notifications for when we go live each Wednesday.
No,
so going back to the... Sorry, Chris.
No, keep going.
Okay, so going back to a couple of questions, I think you asked one of them. People are asking what they can do. Someone has asked, can the unions create a strike or non-cooperation movement to harass persecutors of Assange? On H, as this veil falls and reveals the extent of the complicity, how can we hope to hold to account this utter mass of the involved, i.e. the forces, governments, journalists, mainstream media, security forces? Perhaps you could try and answer that one. So the question was, how can we hope to hold to account this utter mass of all the involved?
Yeah, I mean, and the point about I mean, obviously, as a trade unionist, you might have a comment to make on that. We are sort of out of time, but let's just sort of give you an opportunity to say a few words, and Kristen, and then we'll close.
There's a couple of things I wanted to say in terms of organising. I think, firstly, once people are educated, they will be able to engage with things like doing misfeasance in public office complaints, ensuring that our institutional arrangements are fit for purpose. Also, of course, campaigning with MPs, supporting the Don't Extradite Assange campaign, supporting Stella Morris in terms of her fundraising for paying for the support that Julian needs. And
Stella being Julian's partner, Deepa.
Julian's partner, indeed, who has very young children, and to raise 2 young children at a time when your partner is suffering in this way is just horrendous. So my heart goes out to her. I'd also like to say that people have to, the trade unions, and I'm a trade unionist myself, and I say that the trade unionists have failed to recognize, some of the trade unions have come forward, for example, I think the NUJ motion that was passed is a good one. We've had good motions across branches in Unison and Unite. But the trade unions have to recognize that what happens to Julian also affects whistleblowing, not just in relation to war crimes, but in relation to all kinds of crimes that American corporations commit and the reach of the American state across the rest of the world. And they also have to think about how the British state is dealing with whistleblowers and people who enable whistleblowers, and how that criminalization will affect workers. And the trade union movement needs to be stronger on this.
Absolutely, and I think it's also important, Deepa, just to add to that, that the government, as I mentioned in my remarks, are bringing in legislation which could have a profound effect on trade union activities. The one legislation which provides for, and it says it explicitly in the bill, there's a clause in the bill which provides for the security services and the police to engage in criminal conduct. This is a kind of, I mean, yeah, we know they've kind of been doing that, but now they're kind of explicit about it. And the sorts of things that will be permissible to commit criminal conduct, if it's deemed to be on the grounds of national security, or preventing and detecting crime, or preventing disorder. So that has an issue, that has an implication in terms of demonstrations and our right to freedom of speech in that sense. But that's even more sinister than that is the reference to where it's deemed in the interests of the economic well-being of the United Kingdom. If it's deemed in the interests of the economic well-being of the United Kingdom, well, who's going to make that judgment? I mean, what we're saying is, anti-capitalist campaigners, this is really, it seems to me, giving carte blanche to the deep state to commit criminal conduct against people who are taking action against corporate capitalism, which has had such a profoundly damaging effect on millions of people in this country, and at the same time taking the kind of action that they're doing to close down free speech, to close down a free press, and with the interaction that they're taking against Julian Assange. So this is absolutely, it seems to me, in the interests of trade unions to be very much in the vanguard. Indeed, they should be in actually speaking out for Julian, as I've already said, not just because it's the terrible treatment of one man, but because of the wider implications of it all. But Chris, I'm going to go to you for the last word, because we're about 3 minutes over time now. But you've got any final closing remarks, and then we'll close. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we are grateful for the support we've had from trade unions, but of course we would like to get more, and to get people to join forces, the organizations in our society who have taken an interest there. We have journalistic organization of journalists, Reporters Without Borders, Amnesty International, etc. They should all join forces basically to put a pressure on in this case, and just to remember, this is not over. It's not going to be over on January 4th, where it is very likely that the magistrate will decide in the favor of the United States. It will be appealed, and so this will go on, this fight, and hopefully beyond the restraints of COVID. So there will be opportunity for us to actually meet on the in mass, which always works best post-COVID. I hope that's going to happen. Just on a note, because we started out talking about the Iraq war logs and the material from Iraq, and just remember that the revelations about the horrors committed by the troops in the country, when were exposed, it caused such an outrage in the country that when Obama was actually seeking an extension of the amnesty for the US troops in the country, the government in Iraq was forced to basically say, no, we cannot. And that led to the removal of the remaining troops in Iraq. So it in an essence ended the war. So that was a positive contribution to of that revelation. But the fight will continue, and we need more than ever in a society now that is basically on a slippery slope down to a very sort of dark place. We see international agreements being ignored, or international organizations being ignored as well. Even the United Nations in the UK do not have any bearings in the courtroom, and I'm quoting basically directly to one judge in the Assange case, etc. So we do join forces if we want to change the tide. And I got it dawned on me towards the end of the hearing in Old Bailey last month that the fact of the matter is that this is not Julian Assange on trial. This is our society that is on trial. It's our civilization. Are we going to stand by and just have people being tortured, war crimes being committed, and justice being ignored, like in the Assange case? That's not going to reflect well on history. And we're going to end up in a very bad place if we don't resist and take action.
Well, listen, thank you very much indeed to our speakers, Kristen Harafnesson and Deepa Driver. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We've had a truly international audience today. Thank you to Consortium News, who've live streamed the broadcast this evening as well. I understand thousands of people have been watching on that platform this evening. I hope you found the discussion interesting. In my opinion, we are in very dangerous times. If we're not careful, we are entering a truly dystopian world, and it's therefore so important for all of us that we stand together in solidarity, that we support the campaign, that we get behind Kristen and WikiLeaks, that we support the work that Deepa Driver is doing and others to ensure that justice prevails, and that in many ways, the reputation of Great Britain is on the line as well. And we are all British citizens, or many of us are British citizens watching this evening, and this is being done in our name, and it's simply not good enough. So we've gone nearly 10 minutes over, so apologies for that, but I think it was a very fascinating and worthwhile discussion this evening. So apologies for going over slightly over the allotted 1 hour, but I hope you found it useful and interesting, and please take up the advice that Deepa and Kristen suggested in terms of getting involved and supporting the campaign. Thank you for watching this evening. Tune in next week at 7 p.m. and good night.